All right, we can't resist one more quick show and tell on these clutches here. It's probably the most common question on the forum, on the chat line that we do at Minimania there. To me personally, I've sent hundreds, if not thousands of people the clips where I show how to adjust these in the car on our green Cooper S there. But on a test stand, you can really see what's up. Now, I just installed this assembly here to a cover to supply for the race car in case this one here is just too wobbly. This has been used. Of course, it's very tricky. You can see all the work done, but we showed how much wobble there is here. This plunger goes back and forth. It's really difficult to get the exact amount of return and free play when you have, the throwout bearing and plunger move independently a fair amount. But again, this is a race clutch. There's really not a whole lot of range of operation. This is working. We're going to leave it on here because it's had a lot of work done. But here's the replacement piece. Nice and tight. There's no wobble in there. There's the piece we chopped off the threaded portion. The one concern we have, this is a small bore cover I mentioned. Here's the difference. You can see there's a little relief underneath the throwout bearing there. Now that supposedly then would allow the throwout bearing to return further into the case. On the early Pre-Vertos, you can use the small bore ones. That little recess there doesn't really come into play in the adjustment range. Maybe with the Vertos. The Verto requires about 3 times the travel right here. Uses a tiny short arm with the same slave. So the amount of arm stroke up here, it moves about 3/8 of an inch to operate the Verto design clutch. So for our purposes here, 1/8 of an inch. And this is way more than we need, because to adjust this clutch, if this was in your car, you'd be calling me saying, I just won't go into low gear, when it's cold, I just can't shift it. Here's what's happening. This is all free play. When you step on the clutch, the pedal might be a good part of the way down for that amount of slave cylinder movement. So when you step on the clutch, nothing's happening until you've used up a good portion of the tiny available travel. So what you have to do, and I mean this is so straightforward that if you set your clutch like this and you can't get it to work, there is something else wrong. The master cylinder, the slave cylinder, there's something else wrong. These are pretty foolproof once you get to this point with it. So you back up this stop nut here, and again there's figures. Oh, a 20 thousandths feeler gauge, a 15 thousandths feeler gauge. That's less critical than if you can see what's going on. You have a big spring over here pulling this back against the slave cylinder. Look at this little shaft right here, the plunger. See that bit of movement? That pulls it off the spinning assembly. You just don't want the throwout bearing to spend its life pressurized against the spinning assembly. It is not designed to spin with the engine non-stop. In this particular thing, a race engine, it would scorch it almost immediately. It would eject all of its grease and turn blue if it was run with a load on it, forcing it to spin when you're not using the clutch. So you have to create the tiniest bit of free play. That right there is probably enough spring pressure to lift that throwout bearing off of the spinning assembly with a nice tight setup like this. Now you get one that's wobbling all over the place, it becomes a little vague. There's slop between the shaft, there's wobble here, this has up and down movement, there's movement in here where the ball is worn. So all of that stuff on a regular Mini contributes to a clutch that's hard to adjust because you're losing effective operational range with all this slop. So now here we've backed this up. I don't know, if you were to measure that, that might be 25 thousandths, 20, but you're just looking for the little bit of movement here to assure yourself that with that spring, you've pulled that throwout bearing just off. But I mean, the free play here is tiny at the pedal. If I go into that car, which I haven't driven in a month, and push that clutch with my finger, it's going to move that much. It's going to move about 3/8 of an inch before it's loaded on the bearing. That's not wasted travel. That car will go into gear right now, cold, hot, whatever, because when that pedal's on the floor, you've got enough range of motion here. At the slave cylinder, the range of travel is all correct. If you set these up in the car like this, and take the spring off if it makes it easier for you, but that little bit of free play is all you're wasting, and you can't get it to work, look elsewhere, because it's just plain and simple. Here's what it does. Here's our little special clutch tool. We hold on to our engine and our test stand. Look at the range of motion. That's it. Right there. Don't waste it here. It'll work just fine here as long as all this stuff is in order. The definitive word on early Mini Cooper clutches. This is a very unique opportunity, actually. What we have here, this cover has been lightened up every which way. Some big hole saw cuts have been made in it, and what it creates is an opportunity to see how these clutches work. You cannot see this. This housing has to be here in order to operate the throwout bearing. So in effect here, we sort of have a see-through unit, and it's got a very heavy clutch. It's got the gray diaphragm spring, the full race, heavier than the orange rally, much heavier than the blue street. With this full race setup, you don't use the clutch a whole lot. We mentioned this is a dog engagement gearbox, but more than that, it's very abrupt. And I'll show you here. This is not an easy one to manipulate, but it really is a chance to see inside the housing. Now I got to kind of prop myself against the engine here. What happens, you'll see the throwout bearing pushes on this outer plate. It flexes, and you can literally see the back plate here. I mean, this is rare. I can reach in and touch the disc. And so watch what happens when I hold the engine up here as much as I possibly can and my stand and operate this clutch. See if I can hold the camera still here. And see that diaphragm spring move in a good, probably 1/8 of an inch. And that spring over centers on that little raised area ring around the flywheel surface. The spring kind of over centers on there. These ears all move in. That moves the back plate, which we can see right there through this big hole, away from the disc. There's your disengagement from the engine. And so let me operate a couple more times, because really most of us, including me, until I got this thing in, had never seen this work through the housing. You know how it works, but you can't see it. So this is kind of interesting. Let's take a look here. If I can keep from pulling it off the stand. And you can see how little movement there is here. This is where those limit nuts are designed to prevent too much travel. But boy, it'd be tough to pump this thing up, and really, unless you put your mind to it. So you'll see most race cars just chop off the threaded piece entirely. But a couple more times. And wow, that is not easy to pull by hand like that. It's interesting to see. Well, let's do one more startup here and a chance to shift through the gears. This is one of the dog engagement types, no synchros at all. But without synchros, you can't load the gear with the shift mechanism to get it to turn. So I'm going to start it in reverse, knock it out of gear, and then just the viscosity of the oil kind of has it rolling slowly. We can grab first and then clunk it through the gears and get a chance to watch the output shafts there. I'll try to number off the gear positions, but basically we're in reverse here, forward. I'm going to come out to neutral. It has a range of motion like this. The first second gate is all the way counterclockwise, as it were, from this position. And then third, fourth is kind of in the middle between the first, second, and the reverse. With the shifter, you have a reverse lockout, so it's not as finicky. But here, obviously, without any of that mechanism, I have to find the gate and click back and forth between third and fourth. All right, let's hear this thing make a noise. And I'll quit talking. Not much point in it when it's running, but let's have one last look at this.